I need to ask you, Dr. Baloyi, with BEE, what is the difference and why now? Why this word called radical economic transformation? And can you unpack it for us?
Yes. Thank you very much, Dr. T. I think around the early 90s, we had what was called the Black Economic Empowerment Commission, and I was one of the commissioners. And we crafted what we felt could at that time change behavior in terms of how black people participated in changing this economy. And we came up with the 7 pillars that are still there today. Ownership, skills development, and enterprise development, those things that you find even today. But to us, it was important that black people begin to own part of this economy. Unfortunately, and I like to say this, and it's a little bit controversial, I think when we became a democracy as South Africa, we, in my view, had the euphoria of democracy and being free, in inverted commas, sometimes I like to put it. And then we sort of were not awake to the fact that there were many things that would make democracy a reality across the board. Mm-hmm. We delegated authority to other people to look at the regulatory framework, and most of these things were changed that I believe our present day chains, economic chains, that make it impossible for us to work and to move forward. And
what is an example of one of those?
An example of that is what we call the triple PFA. This has to do with procurement. Broken easily for everybody to understand is that we came up with a ridiculous rule that says 80-20, 90-10. So if you are big, you could come in at 90% of the price or 80% of the price, and the black person or emerging entrepreneur could come at 80%, or 10% or 20%. Mm-hmm. I always like to say, it's like saying Danisa race against Caster Semenya or Wade van Niekerk. I could never win because they are athletes of note, and the race is part and parcel of having been around that craft for a long time. And now you ask a big company to compete with an emerging one on price, they beat you. And there's no way you can. And I don't know why we went to sleep. A lot of us fought this, but we didn't succeed. At that time, they convinced our government that this was the right way to go. And I remember it was a consultant from Australia who worked with one guy within Treasury, and this thing went through right under our noses. Now it's a shackle that we have to deal with. There can never be economic transformation until that is gone. It has to go. Before this was introduced, I was then the chair of the Gauteng Tender Board, and we had the flexibility of saying we'll set aside certain parts of procurement and say only small business, only emerging business are going to compete for this, because it's like to like. They didn't have to compete with big business, and that went away with this ridiculous triple PFA. Most of the things that we allowed to go through was were euphoric, are the ones that are changed today that make it a little bit difficult for us to move. And I think that there's a need to review some of these. At a stage, Treasury and the Minister of Finance could go to Eskom and say, Eskom, Transnet, set aside these pieces of procurement for smaller companies, for black business. But they've tightened that as well, because they've used the law to make it impossible for black business. Now, why do we say radical economic transformation? We're saying something has got to drastically shift from where we are to where we should go. If we take a step back and look at where has the economy of South Africa gone from 1994 to now, we're more constrained than we were even in 1994. I think we've been closed out of the value chain. We've been closed out of opportunities. It's become increasingly difficult.
Kira, one of our wonderful associate producers in the show, mentioned that this conversation needs to go to high schools, and it needs to be a public forum. And I know that the BBC is busy with those things.
Yes.
But this is the section of our show where we say, so what?
Yes.
So what about this? So what about radical economic transformation?
Well, if we don't care, South Africa will explode. That's what I always tell people. We came up with a program of black industrialists. If we don't make it work for the people it was really envisaged for, there will be chaos in this country, and we don't want that. I always say that we could easily tell our people to boycott, to do all sorts of things, because if it's not working for me, why should I support it? But we are saying we want to create a South Africa where everybody will believe that they have a stake. At the moment, the so what comes to, if we don't include people, it won't be so what, it will be what's going to happen.